Hello there, everybody, and I welcome all of you back once again, ladies and gentlemen, to another quickie reading. And we are flying by the seat of our pants as we talk about Chris and business. Now, believe it or not, guys, this is one of those. The entire business section of the quickie is something for reasons that will become a little bit clear. This is honestly one of those sections I straight up love to talk about because, as a business owner myself, I often find it very, very curious to know where people go wrong. Because, and I said this for quite a long time, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, but 99% of any given job anywhere in the world is common sense. And I don't mean that in anything negative whatsoever, but think about it. Don't do anything unless you are 100% sure you know what you're doing. And guess what? If you don't know what you're doing or you're completely up the creek, then guess what? You ask for help. You ask a supervisor. You ask somebody who probably may know more than you do. You should never ever be afraid, guys, to ask for help. Because guess what? How bad do you think it's going to look when 5 minutes later you cause a disaster, you cause an injury, you cause problems at work that could have been avoided because you thought you knew what the right thing was to do? And I think employers will be a lot more, well, not maybe lenient, a bit more understanding if honestly you just require some help. Now, as I said before, one of the reasons why I take this with a grain of salt, guys, is because any business owner who understands the market or understands what they do, you also have to understand is that you are no more perfect than the first guy on the job. You have got to be ready and prepared for anything as well, because sometimes the only way you can really be tested and the only way you can actually learn through anything is when something comes up that perhaps you have been taught about, but you've been told literally might never happen. And why, outside of business plans, you also should have something called a crisis management plan. So when things do go wrong and then things go catastrophically wrong, you will know immediately what to do. Because it's not necessarily because I do like loads of little graphs, Excel sheets, documents, reports, and everything like that. And some of them are specifically about how to run a business and also how not to run a business. By the way, there is a featured video I want to put out later about how not to run a business, the Chris Chan edition. But, as I said a few minutes ago, the most important rule, guys, for any business, anywhere in the world, is that you always have to keep your employees safe. Their safety is more important than anything else, because take this, guys, with what I'm about to say next. You cannot put a price on something that's special, and your workforce are going to be the most special kind of workforce you could possibly hope for, because they are the ones that you pay their salary. You're the ones who are doing the work. They are on the front lines. So treat them with some respect, because we're not at war. We are treating this like a business. And when it comes to the aspects of, I know I'm really going over this, but this is just kind of how invested I am in this whole business lark, is that, oh, I've almost lost my train of thought here. What was I gonna do? Oh yeah, if you want to treat your expansion guide, because okay, so over the last 2 months, I've been watching an incredible amount of Dragon's Den, and believe you me, guys, you can learn a lot just by using your television. Is a free show, or I should say, YouTube is a free show. It doesn't cost anything unless you can't use your eyes. And you can pick up on just what not to do by just watching the way some of these schmucks go about their business. Whether they are not truthful, whether they come in with a chip on their shoulder, whether they have the sort of attitude to suggest that they are better than everything else, but they don't actually have to show it, apart from give us the money because that's what we're here for. Anything else to mention? Well, hopefully this article is going to show it's going to be an absolute prime example of what not to do, because, well, as something I'll probably phrase by the end of this, we have talked before about Chris winning, a prize during his graduation, his diploma and all that. But to be honest, with what we're about to get into, how Chris won anything except a booby prize, I will never know. So I feel like we'll go through the article, and we'll sort of do it step by step, or at least I'll leave some details about an extended video I want to talk about. It's kind of like one of those Graham Greene books, like the 9 Laws of Seduction, or the 48 Rules of Power, and stuff like that. So we start with an example of Chris's curt customer advice solutions. That is not my fault. The frame got broke in transaction. The envelope was clearly marked fragile and handle with care, and it was shipped well in a bubble envelope. Either you, being trollish, or the postal carriers are to blame for the frame's arrival. What an absolute... Honestly, that's... Wow. Well. You know what, guys? The fact that Chris is replying at all to, the criticism of this scale, because if somebody did post up like a legitimate complaint to me, I would go through. I would I would do immediately? I would apologize. I will send them another frame completely free of charge. I will apologize again, and we will go to extra special precautions to make sure this one does not get broken. Because at the end of the day, they got something that was not listed, and Chris is under the impression that they are only saying that on purpose. Because I don't necessarily disbelieve the idea that the person had evidence that their item was broken. Chris launched an online business in June 2014, selling custom arts and crafts through eBay. A year later, he moved shop to Etsy under a brand titled Quickfill Shopping. He also began selling printed copies of Sonichu on Lulu. He held a steady stream of customers despite issues with production and sending orders on time. For a while, he had achieved his dream of selling his own Sonichu merchandise and was making plenty of money. Good start. Well, however, exactly 2 years and 1 week after the start of his online business, on the 8th of June 2016, Chris's infamous laziness caught up on him, and he was banned from Etsy for ignoring orders over a span of months, beginning from when he bought a PlayStation 4. He did not take responsibility for the self-inflicted failure of his business. Instead, he lied to save face and cast blame on Lulu.com's staff for having stressed him out by labeling Sonichu as fanfiction and banning his account half a year beforehand in December 2016, even though he had actually ban evaded by opening a private account and was back to offering books through Lulu services only weeks later. Good lord. After the Etsy ban, Chris fell back on begging and paid video requests to cover Bob's credit card bills and his expensive toy purchases. In May 2017, he felt like returning to work on the Sonichu comic, and throughout the next several months began to rebuild his business using Patreon, Lulu, and Redbubble, and accepting interviews for money. Just reading that already made me feel it's already making me feel slightly nauseous, because it's not here's the thing. Well, you know what? Let's start with rule number 1, guys. Don't attempt to start a business if you have absolutely no idea how to make money. For example, Chris may understand in principle that Chris's really, really piss poor reputation on the internet is always something that will make you stand out. Unfortunately, for all the wrong reasons. Secondly, yes, Chris could probably, in no doubt, go to great lengths to actually produce medallions and merchandise and fulfill paid commissions to those who legit. But the point is that you can't really scale this sort of thing, because for the exact same expense and the exact same price, there are loads of artists on Twitter, across Facebook, on DeviantArt, on Pinterest. There are better artists objectively and subjectively than Chris, and their pricing plan is far more competitive than Chris. So I can understand somebody deciding, you know what, never mind, we specifically want Chris, which you may say that's a positive, they want Chris, but unfortunately you're getting all the benefits and all the negatives with them. And one of the biggest negatives is that if you place an order, let's say in March, it could be well into August by the time you receive it. By that point, you'll be wondering, was it worth it? Really? So, and quite a lot of commission-based artists, on Twitter, DeviantArt, Pinterest, a lot of them are actually relatively expedient when it comes to the actual, not only fulfilling commissions, but also making sure that they have shipped out their stock and everything is exactly as it is. Which is why probably, again, if that's a good excuse is to get into, like digital art, and you could just email what you've done to your customer, then maybe Chris should have taken that mantle up. I mean, I know I've talked about, online reputation, and when your reputation is as bad as, well, Chris's, well, I don't know, but Chris does not particularly look very aerodynamic or particularly very clever, but what do I know? That's just sort of Chris's default, oh god, somebody's actually had to make me do something for once look. Maybe that's the same look Chris really did have when he was back in school. I have no idea. Anyway, we'll come more to this later. List of ventures by type. On the 1st of June 2014, Chris began, and by the way, can I just say, I know I said about don't start running a business if you have no idea how to make money. We're not just talking about, like 50 quid 1 week or maybe earn $30 another week and stuff like that. We're talking about, because if Chris isn't going to work, and probably never will for the rest of his life, I would say minimum in Chris's situation, you would need to make at least $130 a day, something like that. And, well, do you really think Chris would be capable of making that amount of money in one day? Even as far back as 2014? I doubt it. On the 1st of June 2014, Chris began cashing in on his internet infamy by offering custom artwork for sale. He later expanded his sales to include autographed photos, medallions, custom amiibos, and personal items related to Christery. This would be his most profitable and otherwise his most important commercial endeavor. Over the years, he would earn thousands of dollars by selling off Sonichu-themed memorabilia and sundries. The largest financial contributions were often made by aspiring weens to establish contact with Chris and put themselves in a friendly position. Starting, now we continue with rule number 2. You are the face of your business, in the case of Chris. And when you are the face of your business, you are where everything starts and stops. They say everything starts at the top. And Chris, when your reputation is as bad as Chris, the worst thing you could do is by proving everybody else right and making your situation worse for no other reason than because you legitimately have no idea what you're supposed to do, despite Chris's history with trolls and weens and white knights and whatnot. So yeah, bear that in mind, guys, because you are going to be responsible for it's no different from people like me who do these YouTube videos and stuff like that. Is that I may laugh and I may joke and stuff like that, but I am also very, very aware that I'm putting myself out there. My face is out there for the world to see, and the things I say are also out there for the world to hear. So even if you know exactly what you want to say and what you want to do when you don't even have the luxury of a script, you've still got to be in a position where you've got to be rather careful and rather certain about what you do. Because if you don't do those things, you will be seen as too much of a wild card, and businesses will not look at people as wild cards, because that's the equivalent of taking a gamble on something. And businesses do not want to gamble, especially with people who have the sort of reputation that Chris has. Over the years, he would earn thousands. The largest. He would not always fulfill his orders. See? However, and after receiving an abysmal 85% satisfaction rating through customer reviews, his merchant account was suspended on the 16th of June 2019. Proposals to circumvent the ban through a partnership with Jacob Socrates were never implemented. On the 2nd of September 2015, Chris expanded his online business to Etsy. He continued the same offerings from eBay and added a donation listing to the continuation of the Sonichu series. Days later, on the 5th of September, a YouTuber named DS Tex donated $1,000, thinking that Chris would deliver 100 pages of Sonichu. Chris instead completed 16 pages before dropping the project. $1,000 for 16 pages? Are you... Okay, now we continue with rule number 3, guys. Your customers, your patrons, are king. They are the ones who are giving you the money. So when they tell you what they want, and bear in mind, these texts was very, very reasonable. 100 pages of Sonichu on commission, and you're telling me Chris couldn't get anything beyond 16? Please bear in mind, guys, Chris does not have a job. Chris does not have to, worry about, going to like an editor or anything like that. Why Chris couldn't have just, got to 100, I legitimately will never know. Especially if you are familiar with like a lot of things from Sonichu issues 10 and 11, where Chris would get to the extent of nearly coating an entire page with text and saying, "Good job, print." Or rather, Crayola Model Magic, please start drawing on the page. This move remains controversial with Christorians, as while some believe that he honestly wanted Sonichu issue 11 to continue, others argue that this weenish move validated begging in Chris's eyes, as seen with the influx of begging videos in the financial crisis. However, I will say, if Chris had actually completed the commission as was exemplified, Chris could absolutely continue Sonichu of his own volition, or Chris could, of course, would be more open and would seem as far more willing to be accepting of donations that large. Because, well, if you're not going to do it, then what did you put yourself out there in the first place for? Because if you're not even going to do that, then don't beg for money on YouTube, despite the fact, well, what people are donating to you. $1,000 is quite a lot of money, no matter where in the world you are. In addition to these texts, dozens of fans have also donated. Chris simply claimed that he was too stressed to continue Sonichu issue 11. If if Sonichu is causing you that much stress, then why didn't you just, call it a day and moved on with your life? However, Chris still had a passion for making custom amiibos for several months afterwards. He took it seriously enough that he was willing to drive hundreds of miles through Virginia just to buy parts for amiibos to sell on Etsy. He wasted hundreds of dollars buying up amiibos on eBay, thinking that the market for his custom figures would sustain itself indefinitely. Thinking okay, rule number 4, guys. Short-term financial plans. There's a reason why you don't like hearing things like short-term, because short-term is just a very posh word for scam. Or, if we're not going to use the word scam, how about get-rich-quick scheme? Because this sounds like what Chris thought it was going to be. Chris was under the impression that you just buy up amiibo figurines for one of the worst selling Nintendo consoles of them all. Stick a price tag on it and wait for the line to form an orderly queue outside, and thinking that that was just gonna work. Chris, it wasn't. I don't know why Chris didn't like even consult people with like, you know, business credentials or anything like that, who could have told Chris, this is not a good idea, give it up. And Chris eventually grew apathetic and bored with earning his own money. To complicate things further, Chris purchased a PlayStation 4 in March of 2016. The new life upgrade proved too distracting and he ignored Etsy orders, often for months. Ultimately, Etsy took notice and banned his store from doing business. Hence what pretty much began the financial crisis, because rule number 5, guys. The second you start closing doors through your own actions, the actions other people will take, they will start closing their doors to you as well. And they will slam them firmly shut. In the world of business, image is everything. And the image I'm getting from Chris is that Chris's financial situation could nowhere nearly be as desperate as Chris was trying to claim. Because if you've got enough money to blow on a PlayStation 4, then you shouldn't be, you know, accepting donations of $1,000 to draw Sonichu, and then not even give back, like, even a fifth of what you've been commissioned for. Self-publishing. Chris took over a decade to try any self-publishing channels. Clyde Cash beat him to the punch by posting Chris's comics on Lulu.com. Chris simply retorted by encouraging his fans not to buy them, and to simply wait for him to release the real versions later. According to emails from 2010, Chris claimed that he was working on fixing up his pages to be published on Lulu, taking an unreasonable amount of time to accomplish this amazingly simple task. And he eventually dropped the project. Undaunted, Chris began selling printed copies of the Sonichu comic on Lulu.com in September 2015, as well as offering autographed versions through Etsy, by ordering the comics through Lulu, signing them, then shipping to the buyers. In December of 2015, Chris was banned from Lulu for selling fanfiction. In true Chris fashion, he responded by threatening Lulu's executives with physical violence. Rule number 5, guys. If you are that petty and you are that childish that you legitimately have to resort to physical violence as opposed to solving a dispute with, you know, logic and obeying by the site's rules, when you think it's a good idea to start doing that, then they will slam you even harder with legal litigation. Because how good do you think? How do you think that sounds, guys? Because you were banned, because you went against the terms, the site's terms of service and conditions, you respond by threatening violence towards them. I would never, honestly, ever. I not only would I make sure that I would blacklist or do like an ID ban for Chris, so that he couldn't, even if he made another account, if he sold anything that he had previously listed, we would just ban those immediately. Honestly, it's serving that sort of punishment outside of having to report Chris to the police. You've got to do something that honestly Chris should know, and also Chris should just straight up know better. That's what's sad about this, is that if we would have thought at this stage of his life, Chris would have just known better not to do these things. Despite the fact that he was on probation for an act of violence against a GameStop employee, Chris was able to continue selling comics in January of 2016, probably rejoining Lulu under an alternate account. He was discovered within a few months, and his account was shut down. Deprived of other reliable avenues, Chris has turbidly sought other ways to sell his own works. He opened a shop on Redbubble, an online shopping company where users could sell custom printed items based on images of the seller's choice. On the 3rd of October 2017, selling pictures of himself pre-Tom Girl and drawings of himself on framed pictures, pillows and miniskirts, among others. Much later, on the 23rd of November 2019, the spiritual successor to Chris's Etsy opened as a new website of the same name, quickfillshopping.com. Here, Chris would offer his handmade trading cards for a My Little Pony themed game at extreme prices. Commissioning. In December 2015, the singularity happened. On Etsy, Chris offered to create a personalized video message for anyone who paid $50. Many of his fans took him up on the offer, thinking they could become a part of Christree by simply handing their money over to him. He received 4 sales within the first 3 days, although those customers opted for their videos to be unlisted. A few people also choose public videos for their birthday shoutouts. After losing his Etsy shop, Chris continued offering video requests through text messages. The videos Chris delivers are categorized by laziness. He has often been late on delivering, missing deadlines for birthday greetings, despite having an abundance of free time. Sloppiness. Chris chooses not to edit his takes or look presentable. He has delivered a video featuring an upskirt shot on his maxi pad. Explicitly stating that the content is boring in many videos, Chris has mentioned his low opinion of his customers, saying things like, whatever, and wow, that's crazy, that's just, I feel it's weird, whatever, while rolling his eyes, and filing up paid content time with drivel or off-topic rambling. Despite the fact that his videos are advertised as around a minute in length on average, but can be longer in time length. Rule number 6, guys. Prices set expectations. And even when you state your price at $50, you better deliver something that is worthy of $50. And even if Chris was doing this through Cameo, for example, I remember back in 2019, I used Cameo a few times, but even then, the video requests, like, the most expensive was like $5. And guess what? The guy in question that I messaged, he was very polite. He was he answered what I was asking him. He was dressed very presentable. He was a really nice guy. And he also proved that not just in the videos that he also did that I watched back in the day, but he also did this. His reputation preceded him, and well, I haven't even seen him in, like, I know he still does videos, but it's like 5-6 years later. Basically, he does not do any of this. You know, he delivers the content. He looks like he cares. He gets to the point of what he's doing. And everything that he says is relevant to what I was asking and to hearing him address me and stuff like that. And that was for $5. What's Chris's excuse for being 10 times the price and minus 10 times the value? Despite the fact that it would have been so easy to do. As I mentioned before, guys, image is everything in this business. But considering this whole business kind of revolves around Chris's personality, how do you think this is going to make Chris look when other people realize, wow, Chris really looks... Is Chris, this bad? Or does Chris just not care whatsoever? And the fact as well, Chris is getting paid hard money and stuff like this, and still, like, whinges and complains. You wonder, honestly, when the bubble pops or anything like that, and you can't see it in any other way. In spite of these issues, he has a continuing stream of customers. A Kiwi Farms user named Vanilla Cone summed up the mindset of the lot with his review of the $50 paid video he ordered from Chris, which consisted of him being late, babbling to fill up time, failing to spell the recipient's name correctly, and delivering a video 39 seconds long out of the minimum 1 minute. To be honest, I got what I expected out of the video, and money well spent, in my opinion. Well, you might want to you might want to set your priorities in order again if you're gonna resort to that. If you think that's worth it. Chris joined Patreon on the 30th of November 2016, as a response to pressure from the financial crisis. He initially set it up to beg for money, claiming that he would produce more Solitude comics if his fans paid off his mortgage and bills. Rule number 7, guys. Don't strong-arm your audience in any way whatsoever. Have you ever heard of any business anywhere in the world succeeding by saying, if you do not help us out, we will not be here anymore? If you do not buy our overinflated junk, forget it. There won't be any more overinflated junk that you don't need ever again. Have you ever seen McDonald's straight up say, buy from us, you cheap pricks? Have you ever seen, any business do resort to that? No, of course you don't. So why does Chris think that approach is going to work? And bear in mind, Chris was commissioned $1,000. Why didn't you just put that towards the mortgage, Chris? That seems like a no-brainer. Meanwhile, he was met with low support levels, generally below $40 per month. This suddenly changed around June of 2017, picking up momentum from resuming the Solitude comic of his own volition, shockingly enough, in May. He revamped his Patreon to offer more reasonable support tiers for fans. His fans enjoyed a significant uptick in support due to his continued work on the comic, earning around $500 to $600 per month. To be honest, again, you know what? Even getting paid that much is, quite frankly, shocking to say the least. But, oh well, what can you do? As his interest in his own comic has abated, and new pages more rarely released, Patreon's support has shriveled to about a third of its peak, reforming his backer awards by distinguishing different tiers for every dollar level, given have not improved his steady decline in support. This again is like, when do you get that? When do you get to that age and stuff like that? And why has laziness not just burned up? I mean, what excuse does Chris have for this to be this lazy? Is it just a lifetime of only winging it at like 50% or doing it half-assed? It's not exactly as if Chris doesn't have all the leisure in the world to be able to do it. Because, well, I guess Chris would rather wallow in his filth and play, Neptunia or Pokemon instead. Which, has anyone actually ever sat Chris down in person and said, do you actually have your priorities in order with what you're doing? Think about this. You're begging people for money. You get given money and you under-delivered with what they wanted. You were also late and you didn't even sound particularly that enthusiastic about it anyway, despite what you were getting paid and what you were being asked to do. Chris, tell us, how do you rationalize this business model? Because it seems to be almost built on a foundation of laziness and inefficacy, because the only thing you seem to be cared about is whether or not you get paid whatsoever. If you were paid tomorrow and stuff like that, and you weren't expected to do anything in return for it, you would be going back to begging the very next day, because, well, if somebody is really willing to give you that any sort of money whatsoever for doing nothing, then why do you even have to pretend to try whatsoever? Which neatly brings us on to rule number 7, guys. If you aren't prepared to work, then do everybody a favor, shut the shop and retire. Because you may have heard plenty of people say this before, is that sometimes people will say, you know what, move your ass, pull your finger out, etc., etc. I have a different philosophy. My philosophy is to stop and give up. Don't fight it, accept it, especially if you don't want to change. Because when that change comes in, you have to be prepared to work bloody hard at what you do. And we've got to get rid of all this crap about saying we can't do it because, nobody's ever done it before, or it may be slightly difficult. I heard somebody once say that 90% of people give up the idea of doing anything hard because it demands, tackling it with any sort of skill, any sort of plan, any sort of position. You think doing anything that requires effort whatsoever is too much hard work. And quite frankly, that's a lot of the impression I get from Chris, is that because Chris is required to do anything revolving, legitimate effort whatsoever, that's the reason why you shouldn't be looking towards Chris and trying to help him out, because Chris doesn't care enough about himself or anything about his actual customers. And a business that doesn't listen, the only way Chris would ever run, the only planet that Chris would ever be able to run a successful business would be on a planet that doesn't have any customers. Because the bottom line is that he's only interested in money. That's probably why. It's probably, maybe there is a little bit more to it than that, but from what I've seen, that is it. You can tell a lot about what a person really wants whenever you hear the question of money being brought up, because you trust, guy. We'll get onto this in a second, but you can tell whenever money gets involved, a person will go under some very specific physical changes. That their eyes will open up, their features become more relaxed. It's something you've caught their attention of, because sadly in this day and age, money is one of those things where it's the fastest way to make yourself understood. Which it's a tragedy, yes, but considering Chris has always boasted about his intellect and what he believes in solitude, you would have grasped the idea that Chris would have been a little bit more steadfast to actually continue in his endeavors, despite the fact that he's been offset, trolled, lied to, deceived, and all the rest of it. Maybe they've done far more damage than Chris is willing to admit. But then again, when you're in this situation and you take it upon yourself to try and get yourself out, then guess what, Chris? You have to be responsible. You're not relieved of your responsibilities because a parent dies or anything else. It sucks, I know, but guess what? Life sadly goes on, whether someone is here or not. Anyway, moving on. Miscellaneous affairs. In May of 2016, Chris displayed a level of financial ignorance that shatters any hope of him ever becoming competent with money. Days after begging for donations to assist his ailing household, he announced that he would be starting his own business, with the declaration that each employee's salary would be 25% of the profit. Naturally, Chris completely fails to realize that under these conditions, he would have no money at all if he had 4 or more employees. Moreover, if Chris, suppose, what happens if you don't go into profit though? What happens if you if your gross margins are significantly higher than any substantial profit whatsoever? What happens if, like, in the first year of trading, you're already minus $60,000 in the hole? How do you expect you're going to get into profit from then? And bear in mind, you still have to pay your staff, because if you don't pay your staff, they're just going to walk. If they are working on like commission, Chris, it almost sounds like a pyramid scheme, only held up by no persons, because this is the worst model I've ever seen anybody try to again, rule number 8. Don't assume you can start a business if you have no idea of every single thing a business would need to succeed. From structure to a financial plan to organizing supplies and, of course, actually making money. Don't start setting a business to make money if you've never actually made money before. Just saying. However, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Days later, he uploaded a video attempting to go into business with Sega to create official Sonichu products. We will be covering these videos, by the way, but honestly, Chris, you have to be, just to let you know, Chris is absolutely barking mad for the things he says in these. In the video, he demands a 6-figure salary, along with full insurance benefits and maternity leave. I don't know what Chris needs maternity leave for. He does not have a womb. He is not getting pregnant. Honestly, you know what? You could make the joke about nothing wanted Chris's penis. Nobody wants their penis to go inside Chris. Just saying. I don't even think really Jacob Sockness would have wanted to do that. These incidents seem to indicate Chris's belief that money comes out of nowhere and is unlimited in value. 3 years later, in April 2019, Sonichu Entertainment of America was noted by Google Maps, prompting Chris to laud his company as legitimate in a video, though it would see no further activity. On the 24th of November 2016, Chris asked his audience to watch a clip of him playing Skylanders by uploading Quick vs. Coas in order to promote the idea of selling his in-game figurine to them using the game's Skylanders creation app. He would charge $20 extra for his autograph. $20 extra for an autograph, that's still quite a lot, that, isn't it? He also said, "I am not sharing my creation app Chirp," since this would allow people to order directly from Skylanders and cut Chris's goal of promoting his self-image out of the loop. Or profiting. Can you take a guess what they would have done instead? On the 12th of January 2017, Chris uploaded Skylanders Imaginators leader Christine W. Chandler random review and stuff as a half-hour advertisement video showing off multiple Skylanders products he had ordered, a $15 card, a $30 t-shirt, and a $50 3D doll, all emblazoned with his avatar image, totaling at least $90. I can't even think of people who even play Skylanders, period, but I have no idea why. What would you spend $90 for? Like, do you think even people who play I mean, I know there are people who love Skylanders, but probably not this much. Chris's largest business failure, however, to date, followed very shortly afterwards. Various Skylanders avatar products and a Sonichu figure were announced as prizes for a raffle Chris conceived. A push sales of his stamps slated to run from the 27th of March through the 31st of April 2017. The cost of entry was buying one of Bob's stamps or Chris's stamp album on eBay, with a limit of 1 entry per buyer. Initially, Chris announced that the winner would receive a Sonichu figure and a Skylanders figure, and 15 runners-up would each receive a Skylanders card. A week later, he added more prizes to the mix, Skylanders t-shirts, etc. and stuff like that. Chris seemed to be banking on the $1,000 album selling, as it was the only scenario in which he could have shown a profit from the raffle. He promised an automatic win of a set of all 3 prizes. His expenditure for the raffle prizes totaled $840. No one bought the album, and less than 15 people participated in the raffle. Although a mass buyer had purchased 18 stamps, he was left with a negative profit of $674.24. And all of a sudden, people telling Chris to just get a job. That seemed like the easiest solution now, didn't it? In December of 2020, Chris teamed up with Prater to produce more Sonichu medallions. The medallions are not created by Chris, but he supposedly oversees the design and production of the medallions. The medallions are of noticeably worse quality than those created by Chris, but that hasn't stopped the team from selling over 130 medallions as of the 14th of December 2020. The jointly owned Etsy page can be found here. And if you think this is where, things go a little bit off the rails, well, you would be wrong, because Smooth Dispatch has a history of dispatching on time with tracking. Somebody is clearly, pulling my plonker for saying that. And look at this. Handmade Sonichu medallion with Megastone £106.72. That's kind of specific if you ask me. Commissions, read description, limited slots. Still, $181.91. You know what? I'm going to be covering I'll cover the store separately because I think I think my jaw has just hit the floor. Has a history of dispatching with... Chris must have been seeking help. But then again, why Chris couldn't have sought help before, or so none of this could have happened. Well, what do I know anyway? By May of 2022, the partnership with Prater extended to selling monochrome artwork Chris had drawn whilst jailed. Naturally, given the newer delusions, Chris has begun to machinate shortly after ending up behind bars. These drawings primarily center around his pseudo-religion. Abortive ventures. In November of 2015, Chris announced that he would be setting up a shop on Zazzle.com. He mentioned it again half a year later in June 2016, where no progress appeared to be made. And to this day, Chris has never opened a Zazzle shop. Why he dragged his feet so much is unknown. Zazzle takes care of manufacturing and shipping, and there are no startup costs. All he would have to do is take some Sonichu drawings and upload them. Because, again, Chris is that lazy, and Chris takes no effort to research into what, the other ventures are out there as well. Rule number 9, guys. If you don't do any research whatsoever to what's out there, to what you're going to do, then you have no business being involved in whatever you're doing. Because this displays a level of unbelievable ignorance that is, quite frankly, unlimited and appalling. In October of 2017, amid being the subject of interviews by Merriweather, Satchumu, and Coppercab, Chris announced that he was open to being a guest on more interviews for payment. Although he didn't specify his going rate, Merriweather mentioned that Chris had asked him for $200. He has since given interviews for free, taking the bend out of his potential scheme, although it seems that he was paid the Create Unknown interview in October of 2020. Customers and their reasons for buying. See also list of Chris's financial enablers. A piece of valuable internet culture. A potential buyer. While many who follow Chris refuse to give him money and shun those who do, buyers seem to regard Chris memorabilia as pieces of internet culture that might become valuable over time. Well, I have no idea when that's meant to be, otherwise I would have literally been filling up my pockets. A February 2019 video in which a customer unboxed a Sonichu issue 0 comic printed from Lulu attracted over 100,000 views, and many commentators expressed a desire to buy for themselves. Ironically, the resulting bump in Chris's Patreon gave him so many orders to fulfill that he crashed into slumber and simply ignored the backlog of orders. Rule number 9, guys. When you start actually when you're asked to fulfill orders, and when you have a growing queue of people who want you, and the thing you do immediately is you ignore them immediately, you can't afford to be that much of an arrogant snob, especially when you are frequently begging for money, Chris. You think it's every single time Chris has ever presented with a situation, or with an opportunity, I should say, to actually make everything work and get himself out of the hole, Chris decides, no, give me the shovel instead. I'm going to dig an even deeper hole. I don't understand this logic, because it's a logic that literally makes no sense. Or, no, actually, no, I don't understand what the motive is for, deciding not to do it. That's insane. Ad revenue. When he was uploading his Sonichu comic pages to the Wikipedia in 2009, the thought of monetizing his webcomic didn't cross his mind. People had been annoying nay, harassing him with advertising he didn't approve of. Yet when he attempted to replace these offensive ads with ads of his own, he simply put some random advertisements on his webpage without actually signing any sort of advertising contract. Chris, for example, received a cease and desist order from Coca-Cola when Chris attempted to put ads for Coke on his page without any sort of consent. Also, the ads didn't make him any money. There are several advertising programs that allow individual people to put ads on their personal pages and make money out of them. Some of these programs are even specifically geared toward webcomic artists. Many webcomics have a donation box where readers can donate money to the artist via PayPal or similar services. In 2016, Chris had his YouTube channel monetized and added a support button, ostensibly to accept donations for sonetry projects. Even though he didn't want to work on that, and for a year, YouTube simply became another place for which he could beg for money. Again, you know what? How difficult do you think it could have been for Chris to have just made money via YouTube this way? Because, well, I mean, I've made money from 4 different channels during my 7 years on this platform. And Chris, let me tell you something right now. I know you're not watching this, but you, my friend, well, you missed out on the trick because you decided to not take advantage of this opportunity again. It took a while for Chris to try drawing on camera in live drawing streams, and even then, he hasn't demonstrated it too often and has done an extremely poor job of it. He simply sits in front of his PS4 camera, which is hard-coded to only record in flip mirror mode, and is positioned so that viewers see an upside-down video set at a dizzying angle. That's the level of polish you'll get from these streams, by the way. Schedule slip. Most webcomics have a set schedule. Some upload weekly, some many times a week, some daily. Some webcomics update whenever the hell the artists get inspired enough to draw a comic. Maybe Chris should have done some work for POW Comics or something like that, because I heard apparently their uploading procedure is very, very slapdash as well. And probably reserve a whole forum for people who whine about lack of updates. Most webcomic artists that update the comic 3 times a week consider that schedule very demanding, and webcomics that update daily usually generate revenue of some sort. Ads, donations, print versions, merchandise, what have you, allowing the artists to treat their comics like a full-day job. These are called self-sufficient webcomics. Penny Arcade, XKCD, questionable content, etc. Chris has thoroughly embraced the point of view that the comic shouldn't have a set schedule and inspiration doesn't have a deadline. I wonder what could possibly happen when you do that, while also promising us that the comic would be updated daily. Okay. On the 14th of November 2009, Chris promised that the comic would be updated daily, and he managed to fulfill this promise for a while. By the end of Sonotube issue 10, Chris was already placing author substitutes in the story, telling people to quit whining about the lack of updates. Rule number 10, guys. Strong-arming or, condemning your audience because, you set out expectations that were clearly, you were clearly not capable of handling. They are not your audience's or your customers' fault. Don't stop blaming your customers. Stop blaming people around you and take responsibility for what you do. This isn't even really an advice about business. This is just in general. That's what you do. This is obviously not a question of punctuality, but hypocrisy. Chris would avoid a lot of drama if he just admitted that there is no set schedule whatsoever after all. If one does consider this a question of punctuality, it still doesn't look too good. Chris also tends to update in spurts in an attempt to make up for missed days. This can range anywhere from 3 to 20 pages at a time. Most professional web cartoonists have a buffer of guest comics so they can avoid this sort of thing, but the thought of doing so has apparently never entered Chris's autistic mind. The same mindset also pervades every other aspect of his business, namely that Chris will procrastinize on shipping orders. A key example is how he almost fucked up the Sonic Totem sale that he received $1,500 for it, immediately wasted much of his profit on bling, and failed to ship it to the buyer on time, saying that he had ran out of money to pay for mailing it, and only got around to having his mother scrounge up the cash to do so after the buyer filed a PayPal dispute. He also lost his Etsy shop as a direct result of his poor work ethic. I suppose maybe $1,500 is worth more to Chris than $1,000, or the thought that you could get money, and you could get work very, very easily. Some webcomics absolutely would have tore themselves to pieces to get the sort of action that people were willing to give Chris. And that's like bizarre. That's just hysterical if it wasn't so tragic. Pipe dreams. When do you want Nintendo and Sega to talk to me to evolve Sonichu and Roastu more realistically? Now! Chris demanding that multinational corporations takes orders from a complete nobody. Chris has had numerous aspirations to work in creative industries. So far, he has expressed his desire to make several official Sonichu video games and work on a real Sonichu comic for a real comic publisher. However, for reasons best known to himself, he elects not to find out how these industries actually work, which is quite strange. I mean, yes, guys, listen. Even 10 years ago, I was looking into this, and even 10 years later, I am actually going to give myself a second chance. And if that means having to clock up everything that I wasn't anticipating before, then guess what? That's fine. As long as you actually bother to look into this, it makes you look more articulate and aerodynamic and prepared for what is possibly coming. One would assume that a person seeking a career in the industries would at least take some effort to find out how the said industries work. Official publication. In the Sonichu Chronicles and Chris's resume, it's revealed that Chris is under the impression that his art isn't just good, but professional quality. You are having a go, Chris. And that he aspires to get into the comics and video game business. The resume reveals his widely varied skills with both pens and crayons, and his desire to work as an artist for a professional comic company such as Archie Comics or Marvel, creating his Sonichu comics. There is no word on whether or not he actually submitted anything to these companies or if they replied. Because in order to do that, you have to build up a portfolio of your work. It will also be good to actually have some level of backing from, well, references more than anything else. People who say that your work is of quality and that you've managed to make it work. I.e., whether you sell it in quantities and stuff like that, because they will look towards things like that. They'll look towards whether or not it's just a good product or whether it's a good product and it sells. Because these the sort of things that like go hand in hand. Unfortunately for Chris, and also if they were of much better, quality of both, art from an artistic point of view and from a writer's point of view. Unfortunately for Chris, the publishing industry doesn't work this way, especially not in the case of original creations. In the case of original work, the publishers expect complete works to be submitted to them, usually through an agent. An agent's job is to separate the wheat from the chaff and find the correct publisher for the work, taking a small percentage of the eventual profit for their reward. If the publishers take unsolicited submissions, they have to sift through a gigantic backlog, often called the slush pile, of submissions of highly varying quality, most of which end up rejected multiple times before there will be a publisher with the right market in mind and the right publication schedule to allow the publication deal to go forward. The whole process can take years in case of a single work. And bear in mind, guys, even in areas like this, there are many cases where they will go through years of submissions, and when they think they've got it right, they will get to work, but the work might still suck anyway. High Guardian Spice, for example, I think took about 5 years before Crunchyroll basically took the most unprofessional and the most mind-bending, mind-numbing gamble we've ever seen from a studio. Certainly from a studio I've ever seen since Velma, or when they dropped Acme versus Coyote. Because I've watched every episode of High Guardian Spice. That show makes absolutely no sense and pretty much does everything wrong. I've got videos on a separate channel talking about High Guardian Spice. It even inspired me to start doing a little mini-series about how, if I had 12 episodes to write a compelling, fantasy series based on High Guardian Spice, what would I do? I'm already up to, episode 4, and I may think it's good because, well, bias and all that, but that does not necessarily mean to say there aren't good things about it. Sorry guys, I'm back. Had to take a little potty break. Anyway, if comic book publishers have salaried artists, they usually need to have a portfolio of... Yeah, exactly, this is exactly what I was going about. Of previous work, usually work that has already been published commercially, or if the comic house is particularly lenient and most big names aren't, there has to be evidence of a successfully self-published high-quality comic. And even in this case, these artists usually only work on characters and plot lines that come from inside the house. If they could take time before the artist is in any position to present their own ideas for comics or use their own original characters, even if he were able to stick in a company for a long time, he'd still need to improve his communication skills a lot. If the Solitude Chronicles PowerPoint and various phone conversations are of any indication, he's unable to persuade his superiors that his ideas are worth working on. Sad, but it's a telltale sign of the industry, and that's the thing I don't really feel like Chris had thoroughly grasped, is that it's a very, very difficult place to get into. It is the only place to get harder to get work would be the animation industry, because any chance you may have of actually getting your own original IP out there for all of the world to see, you've got to be good. Because in the case of things like because again, don't think your show is golden just because you've been given the green light. Because that is where the hard work really starts. In short, Chris is deluded if he thinks that any company will just pick him up and tell him to work on Solitude Comics. Even if Chris does get in, there's also the problem with scheduling. Most comics are worked on in advance, thus allowing for any changes concerning a book, such as plot problems, character availability changes, or even cancellations. Even so, many of them maintain a certain schedule, either monthly or bi-monthly, sometimes quarterly. Very rarely do comics go bi-weekly, one every 2 weeks, though weekly series have been more common, though infrequently. DC Comics, for example, experimented with the weekly format in the 1980s with Action Comics Weekly, an anthology which bombed and put the title on hiatus for a few months, returning to its normal Action Comics title and monthly format. 20 years later, DC has churned out a number of weekly series, including 52, Countdown, Trinity, and more recently, the New 52, Future's End. And by the way, guys, as someone, listen, before we continue, let me just give you guys a bit of example, because I pulled out a couple of things from my attic about 2 weeks ago. That 10 years ago, I was actually collecting old comic books, and in particular, I have a lot of Spectacular Spider-Man from the 80s. I think the oldest one I've got is, well, I also do have like a Amazing Spider-Man issue 246, in which Jameson basically just beats up Spider-Man. Spectacular Spider-Man issue 149. Actually, I'm pretty sure Amazing Spider-Man has got to be the oldest one of these, because 60 cents, or in the UK this would have been 25 pence back in the day. So how old was this? Does it actually like give a date? It's got to give a date. I know it's got, this has got to give a date somewhere, but to be honest, oh, here it is. 1983. A 42-year-old comic book in my hands and stuff like that. And again, the other ones aren't necessarily anything to look bad on either, because Spectacular Spider-Man from 89, 89, 89, 89, 89, 89. I think one of these is, yeah, it's literally where Hobgoblin comes back from the dead. In fact, I'm pretty sure there's even stuff here I've got about where Bobby goes and, well, there's, I think I've got like a, no, it's just issue Amazing Spider-Man 251. I know I must have 247 somewhere stuck in here and stuff like that, because this is basically the one where Spider-Man beats Hobgoblin for the first time, and Gobby is presumed dead. I'm only saying this because I also read quite a lot of modern DC works back in the mid 2010s, and I even went back and I even have a copy of like Action Comics number like 886 or something like that. It's basically just like Superman fighting Black Adam. I'm pretty sure that's what goes on. Anyway, point is, all of these sucked, by the way, because the time constraint, not to mention the story for these, was just it's hard to really. There's an entire essay's worth of like people who work in the comic book industry who have far more experience with this sort of thing than I do, but it's not easy, guys. It's really, really not easy. And bear in mind, the comic industry also has a lot of people who like fall through the cracks and go unnoticed, like Brodsky and Rob Liefeld. Chris, however, has no schedule to speak of. His schedule consists of whenever he has the inspiration to work. That simply does not cut it. If Chris went with that alone, he would have had a release schedule that would rival Rob Liefeld and Valve. And where Liefeld, for the most part, could get away with it because he owned his own company at one point, and people have gotten him to actually do the work, if Chris pulled that kind of stunt, he'd be out on the street so fast his head would spin. Chris's understanding of copyright is a chapter in itself. Publishers want primarily original works, because securing the necessary rights to publish derivative works is often difficult or impossible. Chris has even resisted attempts to educate him in this regard. And how well do you think that worked out for you, Chris, deciding not to take, people's advice? Rule number 11, guys, is that when you are wanting to work in an industry you aspire to, but you may not fully understand back to front, it pays to take advice from people who've been doing this for decades. On the 14th of August 2017, and that could even be down to people who have decades worth of experience, or who have forgotten more than they know. Anyway, Chris uploaded a video where he updated the true and loyal fanbase on his progress of Sonichu issue 13, which he has renumbered as Sonichu issue 12-9. He states that he decided to change the focus of the comic. Instead of being a crossover between the Sonichu gang and the Planet Dolan crew, it would instead be a fan fiction devoted to his pony avatar Nightstar, because Sonichu has no narrative and no structural integrity whatsoever. That's probably also why. Throughout the video, he mentions how he not only wants the comic to be a piece of fan fiction, but how he also wants it to be canon to My Little Pony, where he himself would voice Nightstar. Of course, Chris doesn't seem to realize that the creators of the show can't just simply pick up his idea because, as stated earlier, it may lead to an accusation of idea theft. Yet another reason why the publishing industry wouldn't accept Sonichu in its current state is because of how sloppily written and egocentric it is in tone. If a publisher somehow did agree to make Sonichu comics, they would more likely task other writers, not to mention artists, with actual talents to shape up the premise into something at least passable. Predictably though, Chris would balk at lacking control over his life's work, and of course anyone doing better than him in general. Games and merchandise. Chris could approach Sega and Nintendo and ask them to make the Sonichu games, comics, and merchandise. This plan would also be doomed to failure because no media companies want unsolicited ideas from the public. There are several reasons for this. First, it takes effort to sift through idea piles, and they can't give an equal amount of thought on the countless ideas fans send them. While game companies may listen to their fans, they usually just want to know if the time is ripe for something they've been planning to do. For example, no doubt a big part of the reason why the newer Fire Emblem games got worldwide release was that the fans of Marth and Roy from Super Smash Bros. Melee were wondering aloud, why the hell isn't Nintendo releasing these games outside of Japan? They most certainly don't have the capability of starting a whole new game project just because someone asks. If the game companies respond by saying Chris had, as he himself so eloquently put, rocks in his head, then you probably don't get a slice of the precious time for making a second impression. Simply put, Chris thinks that even when the companies aren't busy with other projects, they still have time to think of his grandiose ideas, and those things only. Maybe the other thing to possibly put into Chris's head is, well, why Chris never had the idea of, work experience. That's kind of what it's there for. It's so that you could actually get an insider's perspective to the industry. Second, there is an age-old problem in a litigious society. A fan writes to the company and says, I have this cool idea. The company says, thanks, but no thanks. One of the in-house writers comes up with exactly the same idea by accident, and boom, you have a fan who's suing you for idea theft. And even if that lawsuit will usually go nowhere, it wastes perfectly usable time, energy, and most of all, money that could be used for more fruitful ventures. A famous example is British novelist Terry Pratchett, who used to post in his Usenet fan group until one of the fans was convinced Terry had stolen his ideas. Therefore, most media houses will just say that they will not take ideas from the public. The game industry is not an exception. This fact has been pointed out to Chris numerous times, and at least twice by real Nintendo representatives, as evidenced in the letters he has read in the captain's logs. Unfortunately, Chris misinterpreted all of this. Oh dear. Another thing that Chris disregards is the fact that writing games takes a lot of effort. In Thomas Edison's words, getting things done is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Many good ideas don't get implemented. No one is going to invest energy in developing an idea alone if they don't know if the idea can be implemented. Game companies may be willing to negotiate a deal to use their properties, such as characters, in games developed by third parties, but those proposals are usually backed up by real companies, actual creative teams of developers, and serious, complete plan for games, if not outright working prototypes already. Even in the case the properties are tackled on the prototype later on, the prototypes are usually fully developed so that they can be used without those properties, if the plans fall through. Example, Star Fox Adventures began as a game that was completely unrelated to the Star Fox universe, but Nintendo felt the game was better with Star Fox characters. Surprisingly, in the homemade Nintendo Power magazine, the high schooler aged Chris offered a slightly better description of how the 3 fictional Sonic game releases he'd hoped for would play out than his proposals for Sonichu games later on, and even then, they're highly basic and unoriginal ideas. Example, Super Mario 64 with Sonic the Hedgehog as its playable character, and Super Mario All-Stars with the 4 classic Sonic games originally for the Sega Genesis. Theoretically, it would be possible, though extraordinarily unlikely, for Sega and Nintendo to cooperate enough to make a game featuring a Sonic/Pikachu hybrid named Sonichu. I mean, the comparisons alone are numerous and, well, completely on the nose. So they may not even pass the barrier for being called original at all. They would not, however, need any input from Chris or even his permission to combine characters that they own already. Think about it like this. Of course, the idea of releasing it cross-platform for Sony consoles remains yet another absurd and fevered dream on the part of Chris. In the Sonichu Chronicles, he gives Shigeru Miyamoto permission to use the cover of his hand-drawn Nintendo Power magazine as the inevitable cover for when his game is created, even though it's several years old, and in fact, even worse than Chris's current skill at art. Surprisingly, that's not even an exaggeration. To the surprise of no one, though, Chris has held onto dreams of Sonichu getting turned into a video game character well into November of 2023, when he posted a request to personally work with Nintendo. After all of this time, and nothing changing apart from Chris's reputation and mental state of mind going completely down the pan, even resulting in Chris having to spend 2 years of his life in the clink. Offering them his OCs to be integrated into Pokemon canon. Chris, again, you are having a go, aren't you? Equally unsurprising is that Chris seems to be unaware, willfully or otherwise, that Nintendo has nothing to gain by granting fans ludicrous desires for all the reasons mentioned here, especially not to someone who has just been released from jail, where he had been kept for a felony that shook the internet to its core. In general, an issue Chris would face in the industries he aspired to contribute towards is that mainstream publishers will not allow any pornographic material, which Chris had nonchalantly drawn into a supposedly kid-friendly comic. Thus, Chris would be forced to comply with a set of rules to make his magnum opus acceptable for the masses, and we all know how that would turn out. By a similar token, both Nintendo and Sega would probably not allow the extreme violent and sexual imagery the comic didn't shy away from, especially since he considers Sonichu appropriate for kids, although he did imagine his adult chronicles to be rated M for honest content, and that's if they didn't reject it outright because of said imagery. Not to mention Chris had drawn smut of his magnum opus himself in the past, which could make a bad first impression on any reputable company approached to work with him. Not to mention that Chris, being the egotist we know and love, would have to essentially hand over the rights for Sonichu to whichever company agrees to his own IP, meaning he would have little to no say on how it plays out according to his whims. If Chris actually were in a position of creative control, consider this. During the majority of time the Wikipedia was online, Chris acted as if he had free reign to dictate a site others made and hosted for him, so letting him be head honcho of a comic or game production would be a colossal mistake. Needless to say, the stress of working under him would lead some unfortunate writers and developers to quit and or the higher-ups to eventually fire him. To sum up, the future of Chris and his business attempts. After the life-changing incest scandal in the midsummer of 2021, Prater successfully continued business with Chris. Because, well, I think it's fair to say, in light of all of that, it's pretty obvious why Prater did this. Because, well, you can still milk a cow even when it's dead, or when you've been told it's probably not a good idea to do it. Unless, of course, whatever Prater makes out of this, I don't know, but that must have been the only motivation whatsoever, because why would anyone want to stick around Chris after this? Selling drawings he had made during incarceration, and since his release from jail, a further run of medallions and other assorted junk, as well as setting up live streams. What I think's kind of curious, actually, now that we're at the end of this, is that despite everything we've discussed, despite Chris's attitude, his arrogance, his ignorance, his lack of business plans, his lack of modeling, his lack of scaling, his lack of a crisis management plan, his lack of being able to stay squeaky clean, his lack of taking accountability, his lack of responsibility, his general lack of tact and presence, and his curt customer feedback, his responses, his demands, and the fact that he still has people surrounding him despite the fact that, well, everything that he did, he still makes money out of this. It's like a very low level form of Donald Trump, the sort of thing that probably Chris absolutely hates to his guts, because Chris is still, you know, making money on the back of all of this. And, well, for what Chris got arrested for and everything that was leading to it and everything that was disclosed, you would be under the impression about why anyone wanted to do any business with Chris at all. I wish I knew what the right answer to that was. Well, at this point, it's only because Chris can be used to make money. That's honestly, that's gotta be it. I mean, we will discuss, you know, his Quickville shopping store and everything else separately. But with all that being said and done, I hope all of you guys... I know this video has been going on for such a long time, but I hope it's been an informative and educational affair. And I'll see all of you guys again in the next video. So take care, and bye-bye for now.